In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create these Toon style planets. So we'll be rendering these Toon style planets with Blender Eevee. We're also going to be using procedural materials to create the textures, and then these Toon style planets can also adapt with the light. So when I rotate the sunlight around, you can see the lighting is going to change, and it's actually going to be a shadow on the planets. And if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase the finished project files, you can get that on my Gumroad store and Patreon page. The links are in the description. Now, just one more thing before we start this video, I wanted to let you know about my sci-fi construction robot Blender tutorial series. So that is an 11-part tutorial series, and it's all step by step and in real time, and I show you how to create this sci-fi construction robot. So the course covers the entire process, including modeling the robot, doing the materials and the lighting. We're even going to be rigging the robot, and then I'll show you how to animate the robot to create this cool finished animation. If you'd like to purchase the course or learn more about the course, then you can check out the course trailer video with the link in the description, and you can check out the course product pages linked in the description. So here I am in a new scene in Blender, and I will have my screencast keys right down here in the corner so that you can see what button I'm pressing. And I'm also using Blender version 4.2, which is currently the latest stable version of Blender. So I'm going to start by selecting everything, and let's just delete everything. And I'm now going to add the first object for the planet. So I'll go to the add menu, and I can just add a normal UV sphere. We'll zoom into the sphere, and I can use the object context menu to shade it smooth. Let's also press Control 1. So Control 1 is going to add a subdivision surface modifier with 1 level just to kind of smooth it out, and I'll turn the render and viewport levels to 2. And of course, make sure you shade it smooth so it is nice and smooth. Now I want to model the rings around the planet, so I'll go to the add menu, and for this we can add a circle, and I'll hit the tab key to go into edit mode, and I can scale this out a bit so it's a little bit bigger. Then I'll hit E to extrude, and then I'll hit S to scale, and we can just scale that out so the rings are much bigger, and then maybe select the entire thing and scale them down a little bit just to create those cool rings. Let's also press Control 1 to add a subdivision surface with 1 level, and I'll turn the renderer and viewport both to 1, and then I can use the object context menu and shade the object smooth. And then also to make this look kind of cool and stylized, we can kind of rotate the rings over, kind of rotate them to the side. So when you're looking at the front of the planet, kind of right here, it's going to kind of look like the rings are tilted slightly. You can also double tap the R key to use the trackball rotation and kind of just tilt the rings just a little bit. So something like that is pretty cool. Maybe go back into edit mode and scale the rings down a little bit if they're a bit too big. And then let's model the other planets. So I'll just select this object here, and we're going to make a moon. So I'll just press Shift D to duplicate, bring this over here, and I'm just going to scale this down a bit so it's a bit smaller because it's going to be kind of like a stylized moon. And then I want to apply the scale because we've scaled this down. So I'll press Control A, and we can click on scale to apply the scale. Let's also select both of these objects, and I want to make another planet which is going to have like double rings. So I'll hit Shift D to duplicate. We can move this over here, and then I can rotate over to the side. We can also scale the entire thing down just a little bit. You can also double tap the R key to enable the trackball rotation just to kind of give it a slightly different rotation, and then press Control A and apply the scale so that's the object's new default size. And then let's select these rings here, and I'll hit the tab key to go into edit mode, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key and select that loop right there, and then I will double tap the G key to activate the edge slide. We're going to make 2 small rings, so I'll put this kind of right there. Then I can press the A key to select everything. I'll hit Shift D to duplicate, and then I can hit S to scale, and we'll just scale the second rings down there, just like that. So now this planet has 2 smaller kind of stylized rings. All right, that's pretty good. And then if you haven't saved your project yet, let's click on File and click on Save. I'll just save this as Toon Style Planets in the folder with my project files. Now for this planet right here, I'm going to want to have kind of like an outline, kind of like a Toon style outline, and we're going to be adding it around the planet, but we're also going to be adding it around the rings. So we'll select the rings, and I'll hit tab to go into edit mode, and I'll just deselect everything and hold down the Alt key and select that outer loop. I'll now press Shift D to duplicate, and then hit the escape key so it goes back to its current position, and then I'll hit the P key, and we can separate this. We're going to separate it by selection. So I can hit tab to go out of the node group. You can just click right there to select the other object. You can see that's now its separate object, and we're going to give this some thickness to create kind of like an outline. So let's click here on add modifier, and we're going to search for skin. So add the skin modifier. So now it has thickness, but it's way too big. So I'll go into edit mode, and you can hold down the Z button and go into wireframe and press the A key to make sure that that original mesh is selected. And you can now press Control A, and Control A is going to scale it. So if I go back to solid view, press Control A, then you can drag your mouse and make it bigger or smaller. So I'll just make it pretty small, kind of like that, place that there. And then while we're still in edit mode, you can make sure all the mesh is selected. You can press Shift D to duplicate and then hit S to scale. And we're just going to scale that ring that we made, make it really small, scale it down there so that it connects right there at the end of those rings. So now you can see back in object mode, we have those two objects there on either side, but they're one object. So we'll be using that to create the Toon style outline. Now I want to add another subdivision surface modifier, because if I look here on the edges, you can see it looks like a cube. So let's click on add modifier, and I can search for subdivision surface, scroll down here, and this second subdivision surface, I'm going to turn the viewport and levels both to 2, and then I'll use the object context menu and shade that smooth. Now you can see it's not being shaded smooth, and that's because on the skin modifier we need to check mark the smooth shading, and now that looks a lot better. Let's press Ctrl S to save. So now we can create the background environment, and we can add some lighting. So we'll first go to the add menu, and let's go down here to light, and we're going to add a sunlight. Let's rotate the sunlight over and kind of stick it over here. And then what I also want to do is change this over to Blender Eevee. So let's go here to the render properties, and here on the cycles rendering engine, we'll change this over to Eevee to kind of get the stylized lighting. And I'll hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the rendered viewport mode. And here on the Eevee settings, make sure you have the shadows check marked. And then this ray tracing here, you can check mark this if you want to, but you actually don't really need to, because we're going to be doing some stylized materials. So you don't really actually have to turn the ray tracing on, but I will turn it on. So let's click back here on the sunlight, and then we can click here to go to the object data properties of the light. And I'm going to turn the strength up to like a 6, so it's a bit brighter. And then here on the color, I'll just make it very, very slightly towards the yellow, but mostly white, so it kind of looks like sunlight. You can double tap the R key to kind of rotate that around and kind of change the lighting to how you like. So now let's create some procedural stars in the background. So I'll click here to go to the shading workspace, and then let's go into the rendered viewport mode. Now instead of using the object materials, we want to click right here on the shader editor. We're going to change this to world instead. And then here on the background, we can start by making this fully black, so it looks like space. However, I want to add some stars in the background. So to do this, I'll go to the add menu, and I'll search for the Voronoi texture. Let's drop this here, and the distance can go here into the color. And then we'll just wait for this to load up. So you can see there's basically a bunch of little dots here, but I want to make it much more contrasty to make it look more like stars. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'll search for a color ramp. We'll put the color ramp here after the Voronoi texture, so just stick it there. And then I can drag the white tab over and drag the black tab over, and I actually need to switch the white tab and the black tab. And then let's drag the white tab kind of over here and the black tab really, really close, so it's very contrasty. So that's like a little bit too stylized because they're kind of really big dots. So now here on the Voronoi texture, we can change the scale. So I'm going to turn this scale to like 150, and now you can see there in the background we have lots of stars. If that's a bit too big, you can turn it down, but just change that to whatever you like. I think maybe I'll turn this just to like 100. That might look a little bit better. So that's going to be it for the procedural stars. So we can click on the world here, and we can change this back to object so we can edit the shader nodes. So let's select the first planet, and we're going to make the material for the first planet. So select the planet, let's click on new to add a new material, and I can call this like large planet or whatever you want to call it. It kind of looks like Saturn. Let's now create the procedural material, and we're going to make it look stylized. So for this first planet, I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a wave texture. Let's drop it here. And then with the wave texture selected, I'll press Ctrl T, and that's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes. Now that's using the feature of the Node Wrangler add-on. So if you don't have the Node Wrangler enabled, you can click on edit. You can go to the preferences, and here on the add-ons tab, if you go to the search and you search for Node Wrangler, you can just check mark the Node Wrangler add-on, and then you can click on the save preferences if you want it to always be turned on in your future projects. So we'll close the preferences. So again, if you select the wave texture and press Ctrl T, that'll add the texture coordinate and mapping. And I want to use the object coordinates, so I'll put the object into the vector of the mapping. And then I can Ctrl Shift and select the wave texture to preview it on the object. And we can change a few of the settings. So on this X here, I'm going to change it to Z instead, and this way it'll be going back and forth. And then I can also turn the scale to a 3.2. Let's also turn the distortion to an 8.8, so it looks nice and distorted. And then this detail, I'll turn that to 0 because I don't want any detail. And then the other settings I'll leave how they are. So then I also want to add a noise texture, and I want to mix the wave and the noise together to make it look more random. So I'll go to the add menu, I'll search for a noise texture, drop this down here, and then the mapping vector can go into the vector of the noise texture, and let's Control Shift and select the noise texture to preview it. And we can change some of the settings, so I'll turn the scale to a 4.4, and then I will leave all the other settings how they are. Now to mix the wave and the noise together, I can hold down the Shift key and select both of them, and then I can press Control 0. And Control 0 is using the feature of the node wrangler, so it's a shortcut key, and it's going to add this mix color here and mix them both together. Now for this top one here, I want the wave texture color to be going into color A, but for the noise texture, instead of using the factor, I'm going to put the color here into color B. And then on the mix type here, we can blend between using the more of the wave or more of the noise. I'm going to turn the factor to a 0.65, so we're using a little bit more of the noise. Now this still doesn't really look like a planet, and it doesn't look stylized, so to fix this we're going to change the colors. So we'll go here to the add menu, and we're going to add a color ramp, and we'll put this here after the mix. And so now we can change the colors. Let's just drag these nodes back out of the way. So we can change the colors of the color ramp to make it look stylized. So on the linear type right here, I'm going to change this to constant instead, and this will make it look much more stylized, because now if I drag this white tab over here, you can see we're getting that cool, sharp, stylized effect. And also you can change the factor here, whether you want more of the waves or more of the noise. So if you want it really noisy, you could turn the factor up, or if you want it more wavy, you could turn that down. And then let's change the color ramp colors. So for this white one here, I'm going to make this kind of like a light tannish peachy color. Then for this black one here, I'm going to make this kind of like a dark brown. And then I'm going to hold down the Control key and click right about here. Let's drag these over here so they kind of have even spacing. And for this one here, this one's going to be kind of like a light brown. And then you can drag these around to make them more or less contrasty and see more of them. So I might drag this one over just a little bit. And if you want to use the same exact colors I'm using, you can use the same hex values. So the first one here will be a hex value of 8C3400. The second one here, this will be a hex value of BF 6740, and the third one here, this will be a hex value of E6 9E 5E. So then you can see by dragging this factor here on the mix, you can get some different cool looking planets. So again, it's more noisy or it's more of the waves. So we've now created the base color for that planet, but you can see that it doesn't really have a shadow. We need a shadow kind of over here on this side because the light is shining from this side. So we're going to be using a cool effect to create a Toon style shadow. So first we need some sort of shading data so that we can actually see the shadows. So if I go to the add menu here, I can add this principled shader. If I Control Shift and select the principled shader here, you can see it actually has the shadow data because it is a shader. Now we want to convert the shader just to color. So if I go to the add menu, I can search for the shader to RGB. So we'll add this node and stick it here after the principled. So you can see the shader data is green, but then the black and white data or the color data is either gray or yellow. So now this white and color and dark color is actually being converted just into color. So instead of it being actual shader data, it's just color. So now what we can do is we can change the colors to make it look stylized and to kind of give some Toon shading. So to do this, we're going to search for another color ramp, and we'll put this after the shader to RGB. Now on the linear type here, we can change this to constant instead, so it looks more like a Toon style lighting, and then we can drag this around here, and now you can see it's kind of like a gradient, so it's white over here and black over here. So now I can add more tabs here and I can change the colors to make it look more like a Toon style lighting. So I'll drag the white tab over here, then I'll hold down the Control key and click here, and also hold down the Control key and click here to add some more tabs. And then these ones I can kind of make gradually getting darker and darker. So you can see now it's really black, then it gets lighter and lighter and lighter. And I might drag this over here a little bit, drag this over a little bit, and then maybe bring that over as well. And you can of course select the light. I think I want to double tap the R key to kind of rotate the light around, so something like that's a bit better. And if you want to use the same exact colors I'm using, you can use the same hex values. So the first one here, that'll just be fully white. But then the second one here, this is going to be a hex value of BF, BF, BF. And then this darker gray one here, this one will be a hex value of 73, 73, 73. And then the final one here, that's just going to be fully black. So now what we can do is we can create two versions of the texture. One of them will be lighter, so it'll be where the light is, and the other one will be darker where the shadow is. So we'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for the hue saturation value. Let's stick this here. And this principled shader, we can actually just delete it because we don't need it. So now the color can go into the color of the hue saturation value, and also duplicate this one more time with Shift D and put the color into the color. So now I can Control Shift and select the hue saturation value, and we can make this a lot darker to be the color which will be in the shadow. So for the value, I'll turn this to like a 0.04, so it's really dark. And then if I Control Shift and select this bottom one here, this one will be in the light. And so for this one, I'll turn the value to a 1.5, so it is brighter. So you can see we have a darker one and a lighter one. So now we need to tell it that where it's in shadow, it's going to be the darker one, and then the rest of it is going to be the lighter one. So to do this, we'll go to the add menu. We're going to add the mix color to mix them together, and we'll stick the mix color right down here. So now we'll put the hue saturation value into color B and the top one here into color A. Now to tell it which one's going to be the lighter one and which one's going to be the darker one, we can drag these over here, and we're going to use this color ramp as the mask to go into the factor. So now you can see that the shadow is darker, and then of course where it's light, it's going to be lighter. And this is adaptable because we are adding this in with the principled shader. So the principled shader is interacting with the light data, so it'll actually update and adapt when you're moving the light around. So now let's create the ring material. So I'm going to select the rings here. Let's click on new to add a new material. And one thing that's very important for this material is that the origin point here is in the very center, because we're going to be adding a gradient, and the gradient should be in the very center. So make sure that origin point is in the very center. If it's not, then what you can do is click here on object and set origin, and you can set the origin to the geometry so that the origin will be in the very center. So let's now go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a noise texture. So we'll start off with a noise texture. Let's Control Shift and select the noise to preview it. And with the noise texture selected, I'll press Control T to add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes. And we want to put the object into the vector of the mapping. So now we can change some of the noise texture settings. So on the scale here, I'll turn this to like a 35, and the detail here, I'll turn to 0, but then I'll leave all the other settings how they are. Now in between the noise texture and the mapping, I want to add a gradient texture to distort it. So I'll go to the add menu and I'll search for a gradient texture. Let's drop this here, and the mapping vector can go into the vector of the gradient, and let's Control Shift and select the gradient to preview it. Now you can see the gradient is black over here and white over here, but I'm going to change the linear type on the gradient to spherical instead, and this way it's going to start out as black and come out as white. Now you can't really see the gradient right now, so if we just take the mapping scale and click and then drag down and then drag back and forth, that'll change the size of it. So I find that changing the size for the X, Y, and Z values, changing them to like a 0.4 is pretty good. So now you can see it's white in the center, and then as it goes out, it gets more black. So we can use that, and we can put that into the noise texture to distort it. So we'll put the noise into the vector, and I can Control Shift and select the noise texture. So now you can see it looks like we have all these rings because the noise is being stretched around. However, I want it to be a little bit less strong. So I'll go to the add menu and I'll search for a mix color, and we'll put this here after the gradient. Now the original mapping vector can go into color B, and then this gradient texture color can go into color A. And then on the mix type here, we can change the type to linear light instead. So now if we drag the factor around, you can see if I drag the factor all the way to 0, it's just fully using the gradient. But then as I turn the factor more and more down, it's not distorting the noise as much. So I'm going to turn the factor to a 0.01, just a 0.01, so it's very subtle, but you could turn this up and down more if you want to. So it's almost just using the gradient, but it is using a little bit more of that noise, so it's not quite fully distorted. And you'll be able to see that better when we add the colors. So let's drag these nodes over here, and I now want to make the custom colors. And for making the custom colors, if I just click back here on the planet, what we can do is click and drag, and we can box select these 3 nodes here. And make sure you hold down the Shift key and click on one of them so that one of them is the active node, so it has the white outline. I'm now going to press Control C, and that's going to copy the nodes. Then if I click back here on the rings, I can press Control V to paste them. And we can put the noise texture factor into the factor of the color ramp, and I can control shift and select one of the hue saturation values. Let's actually select the bottom one so that I can preview it. So now you can see if I zoom in here, some of those lines kind of end, and that is being controlled by this linear light here. So you can kind of drag this around. If you want to kind of be even more stylized, that kind of looks cool. It's kind of wispy. Or if you turn this all the way up, then it's just going to be the lines. But I think the lines look a little bit boring, so that's why I'm turning it to a 0.01. So there are just a few of those lines or the rings that end. So let's box select these nodes and drag them back. And I can box select these nodes and I can drag them down here. And then I do just want to change a few of the colors of the color ramp. So I'm going to use pretty similar colors, but I'm going to make them a bit darker. And I'm also going to drag this value over here, and the white value I'll kind of drag over here. So something like that. And if you want to use the same colors that I'm using, then you can click on these colors and you can add the same hex values. So the first one is going to be a hex value of D99559. The second one here will be a hex value of A6. 5A37, and then this last one here, this is going to be kind of like a reddish brown. This is going to be 592100. So you can punch those in if you want to use the same exact colors I'm using. And then also you can change the noise texture if you want to add like a bit more of the lines there. So I think I might turn this up to like a 40 or something, so there's a little bit more of those lines. I think I like that just a little bit better. So now we can add the same shadow mask. So if I just click back here on the other planet, we already have this shadow mask here, so we can just copy them. So I'll click and drag to select these nodes, and then hold down the shift key and select one node to make sure it's active node so it's selected. And that way we can press Ctrl C to copy it. Then if I click back here on the rings, I'll press Ctrl V to paste those nodes. So then we can hold down the shift key and select these two hue saturation values, and I'll press Ctrl 0. And that is going to add this mix node here. So I'll drag this up and bring it over here. So we're mixing between the lighter one and the darker one. And then this color ramp here, the color can go into the factor. So that'll control where the shadow is going to be. So this is going to be the darker one. This is going to be the lighter one. And then make sure you Control Shift and select the mix to preview it. And we don't actually need this principled shader here, so we can just delete it. So now if I select the light and move the light around, you can see it's adapting. Now there is something kind of weird here, and that is that the whole thing kind of goes in a little bit of shadow if I turn it too far. And that is because if I select the rings, we have this color ramp here, which kind of has a bit of a gradient, but I don't actually need the gradient. So if I select this tab here, I can hit the minus to get rid of it. And if I select this one here, I can hit this minus to get rid of it. So now we just have two of them. So if I Control Shift and select the color ramp to kind of see the shadow mask, you can just kind of drag these around, but I actually want to bring this over here like that. So now there's the shadow, and then the white part there, that's in light. So if I Control Shift and select the mix now we just have that shadow there behind the planet. And of course it is adapting with the sunlight. So that is really great. Let's press Control S to save. So now let's create the moon material. So I'll select this object here. Let's click on new, and I can just call this moon. So for this one, I'll go to the add menu and I'll start by searching for a Voronoi texture, drop it down here. And then with the Voronoi texture selected, I'll press Ctrl T to add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes. And I'm going to want to use the object coordinates. So I'll put the object into the vector. And then if I Control Shift and select the Voronoi, I can change some of the settings. So I can turn the scale to 6, but then I'm going to leave all the other settings how they are. However, this F1 here, I'm going to change this to smooth F1 so it is a bit smoother. All right, so let's just drag these nodes back here, and I now want to add a color ramp to create the custom colors and to make it stylized. So I'll go to the add menu and I can search for a color ramp. We'll put this here after the Voronoi, and then what we want to do is click on the linear type here. We're going to change it to constant instead. So if I drag the white tab, now you can see it has that cool stylized texturing. And then let's also hold down the Control key and click here to add another tab. So we'll put this tab here, and then this tab we'll maybe put over here, and then we have the black tab here. And then I'm going to change these colors. So for this lighter one, I'm just going to make it kind of like a grayish color. For this one here, this is going to be a pretty dark gray. And then for this one here, this will be kind of like a light gray. And if you want to use the same exact colors I'm using, this first one here is going to be a hex value of 424242. This gray one here in the middle will be 2C, 2C, 2C. And then the lightest color here, this will be a hex value of 656565. So now we have kind of a stylized moon texture, and you can also change the scale there if you want. So now I want to copy the same setup that we used earlier for the shadow mask. So we can just like select select this object here, and we're gonna box select these nodes, and then also hold down the shift key and select all these nodes. So we have the mix color, the hue saturation value, and then also the shadow mask. And just make sure you hold down the shift key and select one of them last so there's an active node. We'll press Ctrl C to copy these nodes. And if we click here on the moon material, I can press Ctrl V to paste them. And for some reason it pasted the wrong ones. Let me just press Ctrl Z to undo that. So make sure you have all these selected, Ctrl C to copy, click here, Ctrl V to paste it. There we go. So now it pasted the correct ones. So now this principled shader here, we don't actually need it, so we'll just delete it. And we'll Control Shift and select this mix shader right here. Now here, these nodes here, this is going to be the moon texture. So we'll put the color into the color of this one, and then the color into the color of this one. And we can select these nodes and we can drag them down. So again, what it's doing is this hue saturation value is a dark one, and this hue saturation value is a really light one. And so this is going to be the shadow, and then this is going to be the color. And then to mix it together, we are adding these here. So this is going to be the shadow mask. You can see it's kind of hidden in a bit of a shadow because of that planet there, but that is going to go into the factor. So if I Control Shift and select the mix, now we have that cool stylized shadow. So we can now create the purple planet. So we'll click here to select this planet here. We'll click on new, and I'll just rename this a purple planet, but of course you could change it to any color that you want. I think that purple looks really cool for a stylized planet. So for this material, we'll go to the add menu, and we're going to start by adding two nodes. So we're going to add a Voronoi, and then also if I go to the add menu, we're going to search for a noise, and we'll put the noise under the Voronoi. Now if you just select one of the nodes and press Ctrl T, that will add the texture coordinate and mapping, and again we'll put the object into the vector because the object coordinates will place the textures on the object more evenly. And then also the vector can go into the vector of the Voronoi. So let's Control Shift and select the Voronoi, and I can change a few of the settings. So on the scale, I'll turn this up to like a 15, but then I'm just going to leave the other settings how they are. And then if I Control Shift and select this noise texture to preview it, we can change some of these settings as well. And for this one, I just want to change the scale to 4, but the other settings will stay how they are. Now I want to mix the Voronoi and noise together. So if I hold down the Shift key and select both of them, I'll press Ctrl 0, which is again going to add this mix color here, and it will mix them together. And then the Voronoi distance, that is going to go into color A. And then the noise texture here, I actually want to unplug the factor, and I want to plug the color up to color B instead. So now I can Control Shift and select the mix. So now we can drag the factor to change between more the noise or more the Voronoi. But what I want to do is add a color ramp first so you can actually see what it's doing. So we'll select the principled shader, and we can just delete it because we don't need it. Then we can go to the add menu, and to make the custom colors, I can search for a color ramp, and we'll put this here after the mix. So let's click on the linear type here, and I'll change it to constant instead, and I'll drag the white tab over here. So now if I drag it over, you can see it's really contrasty, so you can just see those little dots. So now you can actually see what the factor is doing. So if the factor is 0, you can see it's just using the Voronoi, so there's just the dots. Or if you drag the factor up more and more, it's going to be a bit more noisy. So you can kind of have this somewhere in the middle. So what this is doing is it's kind of making the Voronoi dots be kind of closer together, but then there are more patchy areas where there are no dots. So for me, I'm going to turn this factor to like a 0.7. I think a 0.7 is pretty good. So now I can change the color ramp colors. So for this first color here, this is going to be kind of like a light purple, and the hex value is going to be 5342D9. And then the second one here is going to be kind of a darker purple. It is a bit of a blue, but kind of a purple as well. And the hex value will be 1F2059. Now we already copied the other shadow mask and the hue saturation value and everything. So if I just drag the material output here, if I just press Ctrl V, you can see it was still in my clipboard because I just copied it earlier. So now we can paste that. And again, the color ramp color can go into this one here. And then this color here can go into that color. So we can select these and drag them down here, and I can Control Shift and select the mix to preview it. So here is the lighter one, and here's the darker one, and we're mixing them together. And then we're using this setup here to create that cool shadow. So it's lighter over here, and then it's in shadow back here. So now we can create the rings, and for the rings here, I'm gonna make it a glowing material. So we'll select the rings, we'll click on new, and I can make it like glow rings. I'll call it glow rings. And for this, I'm just gonna go to the add menu, and I will search for an emission shader, so it's emitting light, and we'll put the emission shader here. We can delete the principled shader and plug the emission up to the surface. Now here on the strength, I'll make this a bit brighter, so I'll turn it to 5, and I'm just going to make it fully white. Now there isn't really a glow effect, and so what I'm going to do in the compositor is add a glow so that it makes the rings glowing. First though, let's click back over here to the layout, and I want to add a camera and just kind of place it here pointing at the objects. So I'll go to the add menu, and I can add a camera. Let's just add a camera, and then you can just move your view to where you want the camera to be, and you can press Control-Alt numpad 0. So Control-Alt numpad 0 will bring the camera to where you are, and then I'll hit the G key, and then I'll double tap the Z key to bring the camera in and out. You can also kind of select some of these objects, and you can maybe move them closer together. Oh, we need to select these here, kind of rotate them, maybe move this moon up here, maybe this one here, actually bring it down, and this one here, bring it up a little bit. All right, so something like that. You can click here to select the camera and hit G to grab and kind of move that around. Let's also select the light, and we can double tap the R key to enable the trackball rotation. We'll just move the light over, something like that. Now you can see there's a bit of a shadow on this object here. So if I just select both of these, I want to move them forward a bit so that they're not really in that shadow. And also this moon here, I might move this forward a little bit so it's not in shadow. So now we can add the glow effect in the compositor. So I'll click here in the corner and drag over, and this will split the window. And if I click here on the editor type, we'll just change this to the compositor. And then we'll click on use nodes. Let's drag this smaller here. And right here in between the render layers and the composite, I'll go to the add menu, and I can search for the glare, and we'll put the glare in between these two nodes. Now on the streaks here, I want to change this to bloom instead, and this is a new feature in Blender version 4.2. And then you can hold down the Control and Shift key and select the glare, and that's going to add this viewer node. Now you can't actually see the glare in the viewport. That's because we need to scroll over here, and we need to click here on this drop down and make sure you're in the rendered viewport mode when you do this. Click on the drop down, and on compositor, we're going to click on always. And now you can actually see that glare showing up. You can also click on the backdrop here so that we can see the render in the backdrop when we actually render it, but I want to be able to see this in the 3D viewport. So now we can change some of the settings of the bloom. So on this glare here on the medium, I'm going to change this to high quality instead, and then we can drag this mix here to make it brighter or darker. So I'm going to drag the mix down a little bit, and specifically I find that a negative 0.93 works pretty well, so you can see that there's just a bit of a glare around there. And then here on the size, I'm going to turn this down to like a 6 so it's not quite as bright. So now I want to make an outline for the other objects to kind of give it that Toon style look. So what we're going to do is click here to select that object, that outline. Let's click here on the materials, and if we click on the drop down, we can just add the same material, so we'll choose the glow rings. So now you can see that is glowing, and that looks really cool. You could even maybe turn up the brightness a little bit more to like a 6. That looks a little bit cool. And of course, if you wanted to, you could change the colors, but I'm going to keep it as a white color. So now we're going to be using the grease pencil outline, and we're going to add them to the planets to kind of add an outline all around the planets. So if I click on the planet here, I'll go to the add menu, and we can go down here to grease pencil, and we can choose object line art. And then click on the moon. We're going to do the same thing. So Shift A, we'll go here to grease pencil, and we'll add object line art. And then the last one here, select this, Shift A, we'll go to grease pencil, and we'll add object line art. Now for all these, right now they're black. So if I just click on the base color here, I can just make them white, and then click on the other one here. You don't want to click on the planet, you want to click on the outline. And for this base color here, you can just make that fully white. And then for the last one here, select this one, and we'll make the base color just fully white so it can has a Toon style outline. All right, that is cool. Now there's another thing that I want to change, which is the color management. So if I click here on the render properties and scroll down here on the view transform, I want this to be set to filmic. You could also use AGX, that's fine. I really like filmic. And then on the look here, I'll change this to high contrast. So now you can press F12 to render the final image, or you can also click on render and render image. And there's the final render with the cool glowing rings. So to save the image, you can click on image and just click on save as. And that'll wrap it up for this tutorial on how to create these Toon style planets. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and thank you for watching. And if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase the finished tutorial files, you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page with the links in the description, and I really do appreciate all of your support. Also on my Gumroad store and Patreon page, as well as getting the finished project files, you can also get 3D models and assets, artwork project files, procedural materials, geometry node modifier setups, and lots more Blender content content on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. And if you'd like to learn how to create more Toon style artworks, then I have quite a few other tutorials on how to create some cool Toon style artworks, so I'll have a link in the description to my Toon style artwork tutorial playlist if you'd like to watch more of my Toon style artwork tutorials. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.